We have individuals, we have microphones that will be carried around the room. Please, let's have some questions for our panelists. We will now have, we have a great opportunity. You've got two experts on stage who can answer some questions. I personally would like to get started, if I may. We talked about the idea of the Internet of Things. We've talked about the cloud and networking. We've talked about the new technology. Let's come back and think about this from a top-level perspective in terms of education. What is one of the primary challenges educators face? We've talked about it generally. Can we be a little bit more specific? What is it that they need to think about first before implementing any kind of solution, whether it's in the classroom or at a school level? Sean, if you would start us.
Sure. So I think one of the first challenges that educators face today, and they need to tackle this challenge hand in hand with their university, again, is the question of intellectual property rights. Do they maintain the intellectual property they're developing for themselves and the university, or do they put it in the open source domain? And I think if you look 10 years ago, there was a very clear movement to put everything in the open source out of the academic environment. But as universities begin to partner with industries, and industries request that those innovations that are being created out of the academic environment be the foundation for commercial products, universities are taking a very different approach. And I believe that that is one of the fundamental challenges as you start to address this sets of big data that are coming in from the outside, whether or not the infrastructure that you're building is going to be something proprietary or it's going to be open source.
Indeed. Can people hear me? Indeed. Would you like to comment as well, Hassan?
Actually, one of the most important things in the education that it is related to the infrastructure part, that the infrastructure part, it is related only for the IT department. It is not open for students, actually. Nowadays, we can find the students, they are focusing more on, they need to build their online applications or they need to build their projects, actually. But actually, they're not able to find the infrastructure. How we can move the IT to be as IT as a service for students, actually.
If I understand that correctly, then what you're saying is there's two elements to this. We have the infrastructure, and then we have the applications built on top of it. So let's go back to the infrastructure of what you were just talking about. If I misunderstood, please correct me. And we talked a little bit about this before the event as well. Now, we all have, I'm not on Facebook. I'm one of the few people not on Facebook. But I feel like I should be on Facebook. I don't need a university to connect to Facebook. I don't need it to connect to YouTube. I don't need it to connect to Twitter. What is it about the university that what kind of infrastructure does it need that these types of national networks, whether it's STC or Mobili or some other network, what is it that it provides that these cannot provide? Let's start with you, Sean, sorry.
Sure, no problem. So I think there are two pieces that I would say to that question. One, again, around privacy. While it's great to have everything in the world on YouTube, as you mentioned, you can download a YouTube synopsis of a critical piece of material that's 5 minutes long. But we all know that while crowdsourcing is nice in terms of being able to validate many ideas, it's also hard to validate the integrity of those ideas. So what the university environment brings, I believe, is still rigorous academic standards and rigorous standards around the content itself. So in a medical environment, for example, we're sitting in the College of Medicine. I don't want my doctor's opinion to have come from YouTube.
Right.
I want it to have come from solid clinical advice. And if the university provides an infrastructure to share that electronically amongst their faculty and students from a research perspective, that's fantastic. So I think universities provide a trusted, protective enclave for data that doesn't exist in the public domain at this point.
How does that feed into curriculum development then? Because now you've got another aspect to it. If we're going to have a nice private network with which we can have our own content, don't we also need our own curriculum?
Then yeah, that feeds, I think, directly into the second part of my point, which would be universities now need to partner with other universities in ways they never have before. Right? National research networks are something that are becoming extremely important for all developing economies and developed economies in order to bring researchers together so that they can leverage the power of social media, so that they can leverage the power of distance learning technologies, but also protect the integrity of their data. And as they do that, they have to think about how curriculum is developed. Is it multi-site? Is it multicultural? Is it multilingual? You mentioned that Saudi is obviously in a position of being a potential hub for Arabic language expertise worldwide.
Absolutely.
And so, educators need to think about their curriculum in terms of the audience that it's serving and in terms of how they monetize or protect their content.
Hassan, would you agree with this position then?
Yes, definitely. I agree with him 100% because what is currently right now, the universities in Saudi Arabia, they are disconnected in terms of sharing information together. If we think about the bigger picture as well, the universities across...
Turn your mic up, I think. Let me see.
Okay. If we think a little bit bigger about the bigger picture as well, the universities across the Middle East or across GCCs, they are not connected together. Because sharing information across multiple, what we call it, environments, and sharing the information with different faculty members, this is the areas, it is the boundaries between all of them.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second and say something very contrary that I assume many people will disagree with. We are talking as though sharing is a good thing. It is a fundamental assumption of your conversation. Is there any reason why we shouldn't share information with other schools or universities? Your silence tells me everything. We should be sharing, basically.
Absolutely.
Yes.
No, I think collaboration is the future of,
Yes.
of learning, and really in many ways it's also the past, right? If we
Sure,
look back
yeah.
to the 60s, 70s, 80s, most of the fundamental develops in physics,
Yes.
for example, in particle physics, have come not from isolation, but from collaboration. And in fact, if you look at the genesis of Cisco as a company, it is a product of Stanford researchers who needed to collaborate. Right? So the entire set of technologies that we call the internet, right, whether it's the Internet of Things, Internet of Everything, grew out of academic collaboration. Right. So I think there is absolutely need for collaboration. But again, back to the integrity of data, I think there's also a need to develop rigorous standards of how you collaborate, how you share data, and how you verify the validity of the data that you're sharing.
Excellent. Let's open it up. Do we have any questions from the floor? Wonderful opportunity. Question? Question here? Last row on the right.
Thank you very much for nice lectures. My question is about now we are talking about the way how to conduct the information to students and to the people. And we have good ways to conduct nowadays. But my question, do we have to invent a new class or a new section beside the IT department who will create the curriculum? I am a professional doctor, but I don't have the way how to conduct the information to my students. Do I make my YouTube bad quality or my lecture in the same way and put on YouTube myself? Or there is some section will be responsible for creating this and give it in high quality?
If I understand your question, it's really about where does the support and the collaboration come in with IT?
Yes. Hello? Yes. Now the IT department is responsible for giving the way to the lecturer to conduct his information to the students.
Sure.
Now I am asking, who is responsible to make this information in a good quality to go to the students?
This is an excellent question. In other words, it's not just about the network, it's not just about having a nice cloud environment, it's also about where do we find somebody who can help support the educator directly to create the video streams, to create the interactive environment. Hassan, if you'd like to start.
Yes, actually in the IT department, there is a separate division called e-learning division. They are responsible to help the instructors and the students to find the good material, and will help the instructor to develop the material as well in a proper way that to be presented to the students. They are just focusing on converting the educational material to be an interactive material actually, and to be published online.
How do they know it's in the right form?
There is something called subject matter expert. Subject matter expert, who's the guy know about the topic itself and know how to be presented to the students actually.
But this subject is different from the method of delivery.
The method of delivery, what you mean?
Well, his point is he is a subject matter expert. He knows his subject inside and out.
Exactly.
How do we then take this information and push it through these new channels in an effective way? How do we integrate the entire curriculum?
Actually, the subject matter expert will be the professor actually, who know the material, he know how it should be presented to the students.
Okay.
The second guy, he's a subject matter expert on the digitization.
Gotcha.
He will develop it, and he give it to him, he will review it, and he will accept it, then he will publish it.
Gotcha. And give Sean a chance to comment.
Sure. I absolutely agree. I think one of the things that's fundamental to successful e-learning and distance learning programs is the development of what we would call champions. So prior to working with the education environment in the United States, I actually spent 10 years working with the largest hospital system in the United States, which is part of the US government. And the way they implemented e-learning inside of the Department of Veterans Affairs, which is, again, from a medical perspective, their largest charter is teaching doctors. 95% of the doctors in the United States go through their facilities as their internship and residency. And what we found was that in areas where we actually had someone with a clinical background who also understood the technology, they were able to bridge the gap for their fellow clinicians better than anyone else. And so I would say from a university perspective, we think it's very important that you generate these champions within the learning environment. So professors, educators that understand how to digitize content and can help make the mechanism, the actual tools, relevant to you as an educator and how you teach. And I would imagine that the SAU IT department has been working on that since they have the deanship of e-learning. And that's definitely a successful model that we've seen repeated.
Does that answer your question all right? Other questions from the floor? We have one here.
Thank you very much.
I'm not sure.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I really appreciated the information you provided. Sean, I would assume. My name is Khalid Al-Ajmi. I'm from the Ministry of Higher Education. I have a question on the Internet of Everything. With the expansion of technology, the use of it, and the scalability that we all see around the world and within the country itself, there is always a need to look into the regulation side of how you really control the flow of information, the use of these devices, in addition to how the interaction would be really governed. Now, with the Internet of Everything in place and with the 50 billion things that you showed on the slide, I would assume that there will be new or modified kind of regulations that will have to be thought of or at least understood. So would you touch on that, on what kind of new regulations that, or at least the modified regulations that are being thought of or being understood at this time
Excellent
in
question.
that topic? Thank you.
Excellent.
Yes, thank you for the question. So I would actually break that into two pieces. There's security and there's regulation. And I think all of us as IT professionals and as educators, we're concerned about the security, right? Back to the integrity of the data. And I'll give you an example. With KAUST, they're working with Aramco on a project right now to put very simple disposable or biodegradable sensors out in the oil fields so that when they use a seismic sensor, they can collect 250,000 data points per square kilometer, which is a huge flow of data, right? We've never seen that type of data before. And what they need to make sure is that no one is interfering with that data between those sensors that are going to be out in a public environment where it would be very easy to manipulate the data and the collection device, right? So that's a security question. And to be honest, many of the protocols that will exist 10 years from now for the Internet of Everything don't exist today. And from a Cisco perspective, we see Saudi Arabia as a unique potential center for the development of those new techniques. So it's universities like SAU, like KAUST, like KFUPM, that may be, in fact, the source of that next generation of standards for the Internet of Everything that don't exist today. The second piece of that, of course, is regulation. And regulation will vary. We believe that the Internet has been so successful precisely because of the lack of regulation of the traffic, but the presence of regulation of how investments are made. How, for example, fair use policies and access for everyone. Right? So I think for certain there will be new regulations that need to exist. And we do have subject matter experts who could speak to that if you were interested in a follow-up. But I think more important, and from an academic perspective, the more interesting challenge are those protocols that don't exist yet today for communication.
Hassan, would you like to comment on regulation as well? No? Okay, perfect. Another question. We have a question there in the, there we go.
Very good morning. Good. We have industry on the other side and academic administrators this side, and I'm talking from the teaching community side. We're talking of big things, great. we shouldn't stop. We need to think about future. But as a teacher observer, what I see in most classes is we have smart boards. We don't have basic things. That is, the connecting ports, the cables are always broken. The sound system is missing. We talk of big things, great. But the thing is, kindly take care of small little things. And besides that, some training, induction program between at least terms. Whereas library information sciences, it does a great job. Every week they have training sessions. So if they bring experts from industry and train teachers on this very basic question, what doctor has earlier asked, who will bridge the gap? If you could do that, that's a great service. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I understand the question, it's really about training, about equipping people with the basic skills to do things like make sure the cables are working. How do we approach that? Hassan, how does the ETS approach this?
Actually, there is something, when we deploy a new technology in any university or in any classes, there is a gap definitely between students and this technology, faculty members and this technology. This is where the training will take place actually. How you can take those students from this stage to the next stage actually. How you can train them how to use it, how you can maintain it, how you can be creative to use it. There is how you can do the digitization, for example. But like the professor, he asked, he has a material, he has the concept in his mind, but he doesn't have the tools that he can use it actually. There is simple tools and there is complicated tool or more advanced tool for expert they would like to use it. But this is where the training will take place, and you can educate the people how to use it, how you can use it, what is the benefit of, how you be creative.
Does it mean that we all have to be at some level a systems administrator? At some level?
At some level, the entry level, then the students or the faculty member will take the ownership and he can continue using that.
Mm-hmm. Sean?
Well, I just answer it from a personal perspective. Again, my wife is an educator. She's a second grade teacher and has a smart board in her classroom. And I would agree. You know, it is there's the constant dynamic, the tension between how do you maintain what you've installed and how do you plan for the future. And I think that really what I see here at SAU, the fact that you have a deanship for IT and e-learning, you know, you've created the mechanism for a bridge. And it's important that bridge continues to maintain the existing infrastructure while you reach out to the future.
Excellent.
The point is, the basic things are missing. The cables are missing. They are broken. Someone needs to take care of that maintenance. That's the difference.
Understood.
Yeah. Training part, yes, happens. Someone would explore it. Good.
But it's the basic physical infrastructure.
Basic physical infrastructure, right. Thank you. That legitimate point, absolutely. I do think we have time for one more question. Right in the center.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الدكتور سعيد محمد عبد العاطي. Thank you for your presentation and this meeting, and I have 2 points to ask. The first point, as all of attendants know, and the presenter also know, we are emerging university. So I expected from the presenter or from the people who are responsible for this conference to give us like what's the point to start from here, because we are emerging university. So we must take the last point that the technology reached to this point in e-learning, and we start. This is the first point. Second point, I would like to ask also about how we can develop the professors here. Thank you.
Gentlemen, one of you would like to comment?
Sure. Well, I'll take the second point. I think, again, back to the idea of champions.
Right.
I think it's important that the IT and e-learning deanship start working with the faculty, and obviously as a new university that's going to be an ongoing process. It'll probably be a multi-year process. But it's important within each of the other colleges, within each of the other deanships, to identify the people who are most excited about the technology, to accept it first, to then teach others. And again, I'll go back to my past history for an example. At the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, who I mentioned, they're teaching nursing over distance. They're using video technology to teach nurses how to read EKGs. And they started with that specific course and that specific technology first because they had 2 nurses that were extremely passionate about that. And once they learned how to use the e-learning technology to teach an EKG course, they taught all of the other nursing faculty ways they could use the same technologies to bring in more students from the remote campuses. And that's what needs to be developed first, is you need to find people that are passionate about a specific subject or two. I mean, I think all too often what we expect is that every course is going to be electronic in one semester. And I don't think that's realistic. It's a great goal, and if the university can accomplish it, mabruk. But I think what we end up with is a small base of weight, right? A center of gravity, if you will, that then other people start to be attracted to. And then you get organic growth in a few semesters to a very large number of faculty who are comfortable that they have someone they can go to ask the critical questions. And I think it's very important then that the IT and e-learning deanship acknowledge who those people are and support them so that they become the champions within the schools.
So you create a discussion and a dialogue where some people are sort of, you might say, doing most of the talking at first. And then that integrates into the entire thing over time.
Agreed.
Excellent. Gentlemen, I think we are close to our time. Thank you very much for your presentations and for being on the stage today. We greatly appreciate it. We will have a break. First, we will do our drawing, and then we will have a networking break, and we will begin again at 11:20, and we will have a second drawing when we begin again.